Technology is very sexy. Technology is incredibly seductive. And service is very easy to underestimate as, oh, it's just being nice to people and it's the cute human stuff. But it's not. Service actually is the whole thing. And so much of the energy and the effort through technology, Natalie, has gone into making things faster. Sometimes we actually do want things to be slower. Technology has made us more anxious. And so much of the energy in business has gone into the front end, to selling, to ensuring we don't lose the sale. And not enough of the energy in business has gone into when things go wrong. And it's only when things go wrong that your customer experience is truly tested by customers.
You're listening to Retail Disrupted, a podcast that explores the latest industry developments and the trends that will shape how we shop in the future. I'm your host, Natalie Berg. New research has revealed that half of UK consumers feel that customer service is overly automated. While many businesses can claim to have made life cheaper, faster, and more convenient for customers, a new survey from the Institute of Customer Service shows that 48% of people now describe the state of customer service as joyless. 47% found it exhausting, and 37% described it as painful. To help me unpack what this means for the wider industry, Peter Cross is joining me on the podcast today. Peter is a consultant, international speaker, and one of the world's leading authorities on customer behavior. He advises on the art of customer service and employee engagement. Peter has worked across both luxury and retail sectors, having previously joined forces with Mary Portas to build one of London's foremost customer marketing and insight agencies. Peter then spent 8 years in charge of customer experience at the John Lewis Partnership, a brand that is, of course, renowned for its customer service. He's also just released a new book called Start with the Customer. So we have plenty to discuss on the show today. Peter, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for inviting me, Natalie.
Well, it's great to have you here. I think the first time we met was actually at an event in a wine cellar in Mayfair in Berkeley Square, which is a sentence I've literally never said before.
It was?
It was. But yeah, I followed your journey since then. I always look out for your posts on LinkedIn. And when I saw that you had written a book, I thought it would be the perfect time to get you on the show. So yeah, let's start there. Can you give us an overview of the book and why you felt it was the right time to write it?
Thank you so much for having me on. I'm equally a huge fan of what you do, Nat. I think you brought such a big, mountain of fresh air into this ever-expanding sector. And I'm also been passionate about retail and about customers my whole career. I've been in the service of customers for forever. In a world where everything's changing, the data that was coming out of the Institute was worrying. We all spend our time going around the trade shows and meeting suppliers and talking about the frictionless, seamless, contactless, incredibly easy world that we all live in. But the customer's saying something different. The words they're using in this new research aren't positive. It's painful. It's joyless, it's inefficient, it's not joined up, it's going backwards, and it's overly automated. And that whilst we might be proud as individuals in our own sectors and our own companies, as customers, we know that this is true. We know that there are certain sectors, insurance, transportation, utilities, where the customer service isn't as good as it used to be. And I use the word customer service, Natalie, deliberately. The customer doesn't talk about CX or UX or anything else. Customer journeys, they just say the service was rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. And those stats were really interesting because technology is meant to be an enabler, right? It's meant to augment the customer experience. But it's clear that for some retailers, and I guess businesses more generally, they're still struggling to get that balance right. And I think it's interesting because, on the one hand, we are living in this on-demand era where self-service is everywhere. And, as much as I hate to generalize, it is very much being driven by the younger generations, the digitally native generations who just want to sort stuff out through an app. But then on the other hand, because so much of our lives is now being automated, I feel like this reinforces the need to do the opposite, to kind of, to shout when you're not using AI and to offer that human touch, that kind of connection. So what's your take on this, Peter? What's this sort of bifurcation that we're seeing, and where do you think we might be heading?
I think it's really easy to generalize about it and just say it's just the older people who are used to human contact and everybody else wants to self-serve. That's not been my experience. The most compelling stat in the data is that 68% of people, and this isn't just young people, would prefer to wait for good service than give an instant bad service. And my feeling is that technology is very sexy. Technology is incredibly seductive, and service is very easy to underestimate as it's just being nice to people and it's the cute human stuff. But it's not. Service actually is the whole thing. And so much of the energy and the effort through technology, Natalie, has gone into making things faster. To start with, it's all about making things faster and more efficient and so on. Sometimes we actually do want things to be slower. Technology has made us more anxious. And so much of the energy in business has gone into the front end, to selling, to ensuring we don't lose the sale, and not enough of the energy in business has gone into when things go wrong. And it's only when things go wrong, that your customer experience is truly tested by customers. Because yes, they're really happy to self-serve and not speak to anybody when they're buying and when they're transacting. But when they're slowing down, when they're interacting, when things go wrong, that's when they want expertise. And it doesn't necessarily have to be human, but in the absence of technology that's able to truly fix the broken stuff, they then expect human.
Yeah. And you're right. It's when things go wrong. Those are the times we remember, right? We could have a perfectly fine, maybe not amazing, but just a perfectly fine experience where we get this, we walk into the store, we get the stuff we need, with the price is right, we walk out. But we won't necessarily remember that, but we will remember if we get to the checkout and there is a huge queue, or we'll remember if we get there and the one thing that we needed wasn't on the shelves. Like those are, I'm giving you a fairly simplistic example of maybe you doing your weekly grocery shop, but it is when the things go wrong, and that can have a really detrimental impact on customer loyalty and sort of perception of the brand. So I guess what would you recommend to retailers? Because in your book, you talk about the golden rules and cardinal sins of service. So how do you deliver world-class service? And what are some of the things that brands should maybe avoid doing?
I started the book about a year ago, yeah? So it was, AI had suddenly become massive. And I work with Joe Corzine at the Institute, who's their brilliant and sort of tireless campaigner for service. And we presumed it's going to be a book about AI. It's all going to be about how do we leverage this technology to enable the customer experience and blah, 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 blah. So we met what we call service legends. So we met businesses across all sectors who led the march in terms of customer satisfaction. So twice a year they produce this UK CSI, which is a customer poll who's doing really well. So we met the leaders. So we met in the aviation sector, we met Jet2. In the financial sector, we met First Direct, et cetera, et cetera. Presuming we were going to have a conversation about technology, and we didn't. We had a conversation about culture with every single chief executive. And all of them said, without colluding, that customer service, customer experience is cultural. It starts from the top of the organization. It then influences every single decision because the leaders act and lead by example. They set their cultural default to yes, we'll have a go at that, rather than no. They lean in and run towards the customer if things go wrong, as opposed to running away and hiding. And these are sectors that are more complicated than retail. These are customers, these are sectors that are at the whim of the weather and global events and all this kind of thing. And the story that comes to mind, just to illustrate that last point, is we met Steve Heapy, who's the chief executive of Jet2, which is now maybe not the world's favorite airline, but it's Britain's favorite airline, because unlike most airlines who hide when things go wrong, they either hide their phone number, so there's no way to contact them if they lose your baggage or the plane's delayed, or they hide in the airport. There's literally crouching underneath the desk, please don't talk to me. Jet2, they put little jackets on, little red jackets, and there's 8 of them, and they literally swarm around the departure gates looking for problems. And they can't fix the delay, but they can fix your headspace, Natalie, and they can give you a bottle of water and say someone's on the other end. And I think it's examples like that they could all give me, all these chief executives, as to how they engage with customers, they communicate with customers, they treat complaints as gold dusted opportunities to fix the broken stuff, rather than hiding them in the kind of with 10% of people that are unhappy and let's just focus on the 90%. And all of them pointed to this cultural aspect of customer experience as the single driver.
That's super interesting. And I actually had a question for kind of later on in our conversation, but it's so interesting that, you brought it up so early, and it just, I think, highlights the importance of it around culture and, what a customer obsessed culture really looks like in action. And I think you're right, that having that yes culture, like we'll give it a go. We're just going to throw stuff against the wall and see what works. We're not going to settle for the status quo. If there's a problem, we're going to be right there and resolving it. And really interesting to hear viewpoint from other sectors, because I also wanted to ask you about that, because I think sometimes retailers are so busy firefighting that they forget to kind of, just sort of pause and consider how their customers are behaving outside of their stores and the kind of experience they're getting when they're booking a flight or making a hair appointment or, checking into a hotel. So because technology is impacting us in so many ways. It's not just when we're, shopping online or shopping in stores, but when we're just kind of living our everyday lives. So what would you say we can learn? I mean, that was just a great example, but are there any other lessons for retailers looking outside of the retail sector?
What you just said is interesting, because we live in an expectation economy, which means that we no longer judge one brand against another brand in the same sector. We judge everything against everything. So one brand's new gold standard becomes everybody else's price of entry, price of admission, because if they can do that, why can't you do that, and the customer's constantly changing their expectations against other benchmarks in other sort of sectors. And I think, retail was so smashed up by the opportunity of online, because it put such a pressure on physical retail, that I think the great retailers now have really started to understand that the different channels have very, very different objectives and meet very different human needs. I mean, the premise of the book really is I've tried to be a little bit academic and a little bit too clever for my own good by trying to position customer needs at the heart of all we do, because customer needs haven't changed. The way the needs are met have changed phenomenally beyond recognition, but our needs themselves haven't changed at all, really. We might want things a little faster or maybe even a little slower, but our needs haven't changed. So the start point in the book is let's just think about customer needs and segment them into basic needs that are the core stuff you've got to do just to, about transparency and courtesy and trust and all that kind of stuff. And then you go into transactional needs, which are the key things you need when you're transacting, largely digitally, through to interactional needs that you're largely going to meet in the physical world, and then your higher needs. And the premise of the book is that the customer moves along what I call the lexicon of needs when they're dealing with businesses and talking to businesses. And we shift in between particularly transactional, interactional needs, depending on where we are in the journey, what kind of channel are we working in, who are we with, what kind of day is it, what we're shopping for. And we expect the business to understand whether we're transacting or interacting at every time. We expect the business to know what speed we wish to operate at. So I suppose the interesting thing for retail particularly is the opportunity that needs provide to influence what you do in your channels. And I know you've had guests on, Natalie, talk about the physical side of retail. But I think once you see physical retail through the lens of very different customer needs, joy, connection, inspiration, deep expertise, multi-sensory experiences, you see physical retail very differently. And I'm not sure the sector in totality has made that leap yet.
It's interesting because when we think about where online shopping is heading, I feel like it's heading more towards the things that it couldn't really do until now, which is, all the things you just laid out around physical retail, social connection, multi-sensory, all that stuff. I think that's the kind of final opportunity for online shopping, the kind of natural evolution, and something we talk about a lot on the podcast. And sort of interesting to see this convergence where physical retail is becoming more digitized, and then you've got digital retail becoming more immersive and personalized. And I guess as customers, our experiences are just continuously getting better. So, Peter, I want to ask you about customer centricity, because it's a word that comes up a lot in the industry. I can't think of one retailer that doesn't talk about being customer first or customer centric or customer obsessed. How much of this is just industry jargon, and isn't customer centricity kind of implied these days? Because if you're not relevant to your customers, if you're not differentiating, if you're not offering value in some shape or form, then you're not going to have much of a business. So I'd love to get your thoughts on this.
I hate the word customer. I banned it. I mean, I call the book Start with the Customer. Like literally in paragraph 2, I'm saying this is not about this is not about giving a customer a seat at the table, and everything we do is all about the customer with a little kind of cute heart around it and a graphic that says we love our customers. Fundamentally, you either have a cultural default that truly listens to the customer, not just a bit of high level data, but that truly is obsessed with customers, that comes from the top and goes right the way through, or you don't. And often it comes down to who owns that? Who is the customer, the real customer champion that's ruthless and brutally honest in what the customer is thinking? And, because the marketing director is now the chief customer officer, the natural answer must be them. But the marketing director is fundamentally about selling. That whole team is largely around selling, and is the new commercial team of the business. So if they are, if it doesn't sit within the chief customer officer, and some of them are amazing, I'm not saying, but they've got a job to sell, then it's down to the chief exec, and if they are the chief customer champion, then everything's okay. But often they're not. That's maybe not their background. And therefore, owning the customer culture flops around between departments, and that's when you sort of get into real problems. And I don't know. I think it's really, really easy to use as a throwaway term, but I'm not convinced that it's the answer.
What about employee centricity? Because we talk a lot about customer centricity, but actually, I think the best retailers are those that are employee centric, that are making their staff are feeling, empowered. They feel valued. There's a sense of trust. It's collaborative, and naturally, if you have a happy workforce, a happy front line, you're gonna have a great customer experience, right? And of course, I'd love to get your take on this, especially with your time at John Lewis and the whole partnership model. And what can retailers learn there, and how important is it to be employee centric?
I mean, it's a no-brainer that if you've had a hand in creating the customer experience, and you feel complicit in delivering the outcomes because you've had the idea yourself, you've been empowered, you've been enabled, you've been involved in the conversation, you're listened to, you have a voice, then you're going to want it to work. If your culture, customer service, customer experience, it is not about commandments. It's not about it. It is about creating a culture where the happy employees, happy customers, and so on. And it's again very, very easy to sort of claim to do, but far harder to actually deliver it in reality. To pass the power over to your team is a big leap for a lot of businesses.
It's a huge leap. And also there's a lot of churn in our sector, right? So it's, you have a constant influx of new people coming in and learning I'm talking about frontline store staff, which are, they are the brand, right? And it's critical that equipping them with technology and ensuring that they feel valued, as we said, is really important when it comes to offering that customer experience. And also, not that we want to pit online against in-store, but you do have to give shoppers a reason to come into the store these days because we can access everything online. So I think, as you touched on earlier, that trust, that expertise that you get from staff is, I think it's critical these days.
I mean, you also have to be brutally honest in this business of customer experience. You have to be brutally honest in a number of ways. You have to be brutally honest if a customer innovation hasn't worked in the way you wanted it to do. And I know you've talked about self-serve in the past on the podcast, and it's a regular topic, but I also have my view. Nobody promised in the business case for self-serve in supermarkets that actually there'd be massive security gates because there's an uplift in shoplifting. Nobody promised there'd be mental health issues with this poor, wretched individual who's running around all these machines that are sort of, going wrong at the same time and all screaming commands out. Nobody promised all this stuff, and when it isn't quite the seamless, fabulous, swift, easy experience that we were promised, you've got to be brutally honest in your culture. But when a customer innovation hasn't quite delivered what it was meant to, but you've also got to be brutally honest about people, because not everybody is born to serve. Not a lot of people are happy back of house in this world, and that's okay. It's okay. But being front of house, serving, is hard. Because customers aren't always as well behaved as they should be, particularly now, as we've seen. So serving is difficult. So you've got to have that inbuilt resilience, curiosity, and happiness to want to serve in every single sector. And retail's not difficult, but you've got to therefore be honest about, listen, we've probably got a lot of people in this business who we're not paying enough, or we're not putting through the right lens of recruitment to ensure we've got the right people on the front line to deal with customer experience and customers today. So I think that honesty in your culture is really important. So that's probably why in the book I focus a lot about hiring and recruitment and culture building and leadership, I suppose.
Yeah. No, I'm giggling over here because I won't name and shame, but I was at a self-checkout yesterday at one of the discount supermarkets, and I kid you not, I had to have help about 9 or 10 times. I mean, it was a lot of stuff. I probably should have gone to the manned checkout, but that's also too stressful in one of those budget supermarkets. But it just wasn't working, and I was 9 or 10 times having needing someone to come over and enter the code and help you out, and you're just like, oh, I just want to get out of here. This is painful. This is not what it's not what self-service is designed to do. So sometimes, it just doesn't work.
But once you've made that irreversible commitment to technology, it takes a really brave soul around the board table or around the say, you know what, this is going on. And the customers, if you really ask them, not a high level, have your say questionnaire that comes out every sort of 5 minutes, but in a really properly deep dive into what customers are saying, they ain't happy. But it's when so much money's been invested in the technology and they're aimed at plan B, it's not easy to put your hand up.
Yeah. And also because our needs are very nuanced these days. And sometimes I'll want self-service, other times I won't. And I think as a retailer, it must be so difficult to manage that complexity. I want to get your thoughts, Peter, on the future. So it was interesting to hear you say that when you started out writing the book, you thought it was going to be a book about AI in relation to customer service. So I want to get your thoughts on AI, because there's a lot of talk about Gen AI chatbots, for example, and not the traditional ones that are totally infuriating and don't work, but the Gen AI ones, the ones that are getting smarter and more effective. And they are, according to some retailers, they're reducing the strain on contact centers because they are able to resolve problems. And also, I think they're being embraced by consumers who are now a lot more comfortable with this tech compared to just 12 months ago, because we're all using ChatGPT and Gemini. So I'd love to get your thoughts. I mean, it doesn't have to be specific around Gen AI chatbots, but how do you see the role of AI in customer service? Should we be optimistic about this, or are we heading towards a dystopian world of automated experiences?
I mean, there's no doubt about it. It is incredibly exciting. The potential is breathtaking, and it's moving at a pace of knots that is both exhilarating but also concerning, because part of our track record in the use of technology has not been great. We have introduced these pretty lousy chatbots. We have allowed contact centers to become spirals of doom. With multiple options and customers just getting lost. In a world that they never voted to be part of. Once you look at it without brutal honesty, with a blind faith in technology, and you let go of all the people, which could very easily happen. It's very easy to imagine that the cost-saving arguments of technology are so big that all the people have gone. Certainly in contact centers, but why not in a lot of other areas, apart from manual jobs? Then they've gone. And that probably does concern me. And I see too many examples, and we talked just now about self-serve, but when businesses have made such a pivot into technology that it's almost impossible to get out of it. I hate to talk about the Horizon scandal, but that was the biggest, most public display of why blind faith in technology can lead to very, very dangerous things. On the journey to the automation, let's just call it the implementation of agentic, artificial intelligence, which is potentially very, very exciting. Ask your customers if things are getting better or if things are getting worse. In real ways, have proper conversations with customers, and they will tell you. You're sometimes going to ask customers 2 or 3 times, because the first time you ask them, they might just be trying to get out of this as quickly as possible, or win the 250 quid that you've offered them in return for their information. But if you have a proper conversation with customers, then they will tell you if this is working or not.
Yes, great advice. Peter, I have one final question for you. We have a lot of retail leaders that tune into the podcast. What is one piece of advice or one thing that you'd like them to take away from today's conversation?
I mean, I mentioned before that all of the leaders that we met for this book project, from some really, really first-class businesses, were all leaders of businesses who are winning this battle for customer satisfaction, and they all had one thing in common, is that they lead by example, and they spend time consistently, systematically listening to customers. They don't just do it because it's part of their induction program and they get on the plane and fly around the world 3 times and then they get a bit of PR and they've done it. But they spend time on the doorstep, in the van, on the plane, in the contact center every single month, at least. And they make sure their entire leadership team does the same. And the influence that these conversations have on the way they make decisions in their businesses, it is really, really quite staggering, because they're not just looking at some data and then just relying on that. They're bringing lived experience into the boardroom, and they all do it And I think if there's one bit of advice, that's something that I certainly had an impact on me.
Yeah. So roll your sleeves up, walk the aisles, and experience what your customers are experiencing firsthand. I think that's a great note to end on. So Peter, it's been wonderful to catch up. Best of luck with the book. And to our listeners, make sure you check the show notes where you can learn more about Peter and where to find his book. Thank you for listening to Retail Disrupted. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to support the podcast, please leave a rating or review or share it with others. It really makes a difference.